everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today I'm delighted to welcome my very good friend, soccer coach and podcaster extraordinaire, Gary Curneen. Gary, welcome, mate.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. Big fan of the podcast, so excited to be on.
Well, it's great to have you on at last. I've spent so many journeys listening to you interview people on your podcast, The Modern Soccer Coach. I thought I'd give it a go myself. Now, just to warn everybody, Gary has got just about the whole population of Chicago sitting behind him in a coffee shop at the moment. So we're going to try and, I think he's testing our mental toughness here. I think that's what you're trying to do, mate, aren't you?
Brilliant.
So yeah, I thought I'd turn the tables and get you on the Sports Psych Show, ask you some questions about all things coaching, soccer coaching, and soccer psychology. But look, I know that there's going to be loads of people who listen to the Sports Psych Show who know you or know of you and have listened to your podcast, but there are going to be some who haven't. I don't know who they are, Gary. You know, they've been living in a hole for the last few years, but no, there will be some who haven't. So, do you want to introduce yourself, mate? Tell us who you are, where you've been, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I grew up in Northern Ireland. Came over to the US when I was 18 to do the whole college soccer route, and 4 years later, I went into coaching. Didn't really intend to, but that was the avenue to stay in the US and prolong the old visa. So stayed on the coaching side and did my badges. A woman's job opened up at the university that I was working at. I stayed there for 8 years. So that was at a Division II school in North Carolina, Wingate University. And then I decided that I wanted to try and progress up the ranks. I took a job in Cincinnati, Division I assistant for a year. A job opened up in Bakersfield, California as a head coach. So I went there, Division I for 4 years. And then again, just something different. And I wanted to test myself in a different way. So I left that a year and a half ago and took a position with the Chicago Red Stars in the Women's Professional League. So I've just started my second season with them. And then obviously on top of that, do little things with Modern Soccer Coach and podcasts and books and try to improve myself and from a selfish point of view, find out a bit more from the top people in the field.
Well, let's start actually. Let's go back a little bit. Let's start with your playing days. Give me. I tell you what. I've never asked you this before, so what a great way to start the podcast. Give me a mark out of 10 for your mindset when you were a soccer player playing for. Was it Wingate?
Wingate University.
Yeah. So was that a strength of yours, the psychological side, or an area when you reflect back could have and should have been better?
I went through interesting. Probably when I started, my first year was real homesickness, right. And it really affected my game. So, and obviously you don't really reflect when you're 18 years of age. You don't sit down, and I wasn't the type. I would be pretty introverted and a bit of a thinker, but I didn't put two and two together how it impacted my game. But as I became better, as I became a bit more comfortable off the field, I became better on the field, and then as I became more confident, a little boy in a town from Northern Ireland, when you go to America, it's pretty daunting. But then as you kind of get through the challenge of making friends and having a social group around you, I then became more confident. As I became more confident as a person, I became a more confident player, but not necessarily a better athlete. I was really, really small. So mindset would have been the top. I was a centre midfielder, and was a foot smaller and 50 pounds lighter than anyone else, but I was a ball winner, and I think the reason why I did that was all down to mindset, and probably mindset definitely trumped my ability, that's for sure.
Okay, so it was a real strength in terms of performance psychology, the ability to apply psychology, high-performing psychology on the pitch.
In terms of, and how I viewed myself, like I would prepare for a game, I would prepare visualization, yep. I would watch players that I wanted to be. Like I was a massive Roy Keane fan, I would base my game on him. I would prepare, I would try and get in the opponent's head. So those characteristics of mental toughness or whatever, I thought I was pretty good at. But when I look now and I look at players who the ability to think through the game, the ability to make decisions, I wasn't great at that there. So it helped me in this physical sense, but not necessarily in a tactical or soccer sense enough to really make a difference.
So one could discriminate there between mental skills and cognitive skills. So from a mental skill perspective, the ability, whether it's self-talk or some kind of psychological technique to keep yourself working hard, keep yourself energized, keep yourself moving, striving to find space. But the cognitive skills in terms of search, decide and execute, or decide and execute, perhaps wasn't you were the height of Messi, or a touch bit taller, but you didn't quite have those cognitive skills that Messi has.
That's it. You've just summed me up 25 years later.
Absolutely. And with an edge of Roy Keane. So did you get sent off much?
My disciplinary record was horrific. Yeah, absolutely
Really?
horrific. But that was you could get away with murder back then. It was great.
It was kind of a Vinnie Jones tackle on the halfway line. Sort of.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? I don't know. I think you're about my age. Do you remember that Vinnie Jones, Steve McMahon tackle?
Cup final.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
1988 FA Cup final when he basically took his head out, and he didn't get a yellow card either.
I watched that, but there's a Vinnie Jones Soccer Hard Man video. Remember it? And I remember getting it. I'm thinking, wow, you could actually, if you struggle with ability, you could actually still make a difference in this game. It's fantastic. And that, fortunately enough, that hadn't travelled to America yet, but they're well clued up now.
I can just imagine you in your travelling team there, just going around, just terrorising the opposing midfielders there. But it's interesting, mate, and we'll go on and talk about this because I'm sure this has impacted your coaching. How it sounds like you felt that you were fairly accomplished on the mental skills side of things, but when you arrived in America, you felt like you were a bit of a fish out of water. I look back at my childhood, and as I said, we're quite similar ages. So it was at a time where America ruled everything in sport. I think. I mean, every great sports person, competitor was from America, and although that probably didn't shine through in soccer, it's still you're this Northern Irishman or this Englishman or this Scotsman going to America, bright lights, big city type thing, and you do feel intimidated. And it's interesting how that tapped into the introverted side of you, and perhaps at the beginning there you didn't quite express yourself on the pitch, and it's interesting. It sounds to me like that well-being piece, the welfare piece, the being out of your comfort zone impacted how you felt on the pitch and subsequently how you performed.
Yeah, and I think I've thought of this a lot. I think there's an inferiority complex growing up in a small community in Northern Ireland where you don't really. I read a lot of Rasmus Ankerson and how the goal mine effect and how one person making it triggers another person and all of a sudden breeds this community of belief. And in Northern Ireland, outside Belfast, you don't really have that. There was no professional players, so when you go away, you're almost my self-image was so low because you almost talk yourself down as I don't really belong here. And then you're saying that to yourself, but you're going into a classroom of 25 American students, and the teacher asks you a question, and in a night out, it's great, you've got an accent, but to do that in a classroom setting, and the teacher says it, and you've got probably the wrong answer initially, and then all of a sudden, everyone looks at you saying, "What's he saying?"
Yes.
And it's not in a welcoming way, It's like, yeah, and that impacted me, and that would have been getting through that was built me. Like I cried every day for 6 months. Once I got through that, I became stronger. And then I remember reading a book. It would have been 2 years into that. It was Rick Pitino's book, and it was basically on how your mindset can become a better teammate and become. And that was where my first introduction to sports psychology, and that was where I thought, I'm all about this.
Right, yeah, and I'm just thinking you mentioned Rasmus Ankerson's name, and as you say, his goldmine effect, and Northern Ireland's an interesting one, isn't it? Because obviously the George Best effect never quite happened there from a footballing perspective? And I say that as someone, I'm sure there were far more knowledgeable people than me on Northern Irish football who will say, well, actually, this happened and that happened. But my perception is it didn't quite happen. Golf is an interesting one from there because obviously you had Darren Clarke and then Graham McDowell and then Rory. But they're from very different generations. So I suppose the Rasmus Ankerson notion of gold mine, which is he went and explored Russian women's tennis, didn't he, and South Korean women's golf, Jamaican sprinting, Kenyan running, and said, look, there's these little pockets whereby one person creates this catalyst, as you said. But you think, is that in golf in Northern Ireland? But Darren Clarke was much older than Graham McDowell, who's much older than Rory. So I'm just not too sure that happened there with the golf.
Yeah, I think it's hard with the golf because the sample size is a lot smaller in Northern Ireland, so it's harder. But I think in the golf they're almost harder to relate to because it's they're the to be an outstanding golfer, as you know, Dan, there's a lot of good golfers in Northern Ireland. There's not a lot of great golfers, so to make that breakthrough, you do have to. The climate would play a view, and then all of a sudden, they're not as relatable to as soccer players, and that's what I would. And that's George Best. I'm just thinking when you're saying that, I'm like, yeah, not a lot of people. We didn't own George Best. You almost give him away to the world as like a Bob Marley type figure. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And Gaelic. It's happened in Gaelic football in my town where Tyrone Gaelic football has kicked on and never won a national title, and now they've won 6 or 7.
Okay.
But I would have been a real fixed mindset up until reading that book even. And I hope it happens to Northern Ireland football, but on the women's side, I'd love to see it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, moving on, after your playing days, how did you get that assistant's post at Wingate? So you were playing, and then did you get offered it? Did you suddenly start coaching? How did it work?
Yeah, really funny story. I had all the time in my mind that I was going to do football for 4 years and then almost say goodbye to soccer. That was the end of it at 22. Okay. I was going to move into business, and I was a business GCSEs, business A levels. I wanted to crack corporate America. I really liked the idea of a big building with overlooking the city and driving a really nice car and this, what's the Michael Douglas movie, Wall Street?
Wall Street. I can see you as the Charlie Sheen character, mate. Yeah, I'm with you there.
So what I did was, the year before my senior year, I didn't go home in the summer and I sold books. This was gonna be my apprenticeship. I was gonna sell books door to door in America, in small town America, and I did sales school. So it was like a cult. So you basically signed up to, there was 2,000, 3,000, great business model, 2,000, 3,000 kids, college kids, and they were all scattered across the US. You hit on as many doors as possible. You had this sales pitch, and the sales school was 2 or 3 days in Nashville, Tennessee, and then you were sent out I was sent to Ohio, and it blew me away. I did business studies. Like I said, I did a degree in business. I learned more in 3 days than I learned in 6 years of studying it. And I went out and this is brilliant. So there's all different psychology of sales. So when you knock on a door and a person said not interested, whether there's a potential customer in there with a kid selling an encyclopedia. You've got a bumper sticker, you've got a slide in if you get in the house, you're there. So I'm armed with all this information to try and wire my way into someone's head to buy an encyclopedia. On the first day at the job, I knocked on the first door at 7:59. They said, you always knock on your first door before 8 a.m. The woman answered the door and said, yeah, I'm not interested. And here was my response, yeah, no worries, sorry for bothering you. And I thought, I can't do this. I can't do it. So
I thought you were going to give me a sales gem there. I was going to write this down. It was like, yeah, no, okay.
So I went back. I called my head coach and I said, hey, I'm quitting here. And he's like, you're an idiot. He was laughing. You're an idiot. You told me you were going to make 30 grand. So I went back and he just took pity on me, and I had nothing else lined up. And he said, listen, if you've got nothing else, hang tight for 2 years, do your master's degree and help me out, pump up balls and do that. And that summer I went back to Belfast with him actually and did the coaching course. And that was the first time that I realised that there was more to coaching than X's and O's. There was psychology, there was preparation, there was relationships with players. You could impact the team in different ways. And then I was hooked, and I went back then and just I was lucky that he let me do a lot. So I made a lot of mistakes, but I got a lot of practice in, and then I was well on my way. I was hooked.
There's definitely some more mileage in taking the mick out of you with the sales stuff, but I'll try and be serious here. So let's go. You said something really interesting there, is that you went to Belfast and did your badges, and I know the courses in Northern Ireland are really, really good and has some really good former players going over there. And that's my question for you, is that you said that's the first time I appreciated other aspects, the as I like to say, the psychosocial aspects of the game and of coaching. And do you think there's an element that as a player you don't necessarily appreciate that, or even if you do, it's only at the surface level, and then it's only when you do those badges and you start coaching that it's like, oh, hang on, this isn't like playing, coaching is more than this?
Yeah, 100%. And especially, you're very self-centered as a player, and you just view the game through your lens, and you're not really interested in other people, and in your mind you are mentally tough and you are maximising, you are pushing every day, so you see yourself in a really nice way. And then when you sit as a coach and you start that there, your eyes are open to 26 other people and how they interact, and you also then you get a bit of a wake-up call where you thought, I could have been better if I had done X, Y, or Z, or if I had applied it to my game. And that was I didn't look back and regret. I was pretty excited to be like, I thought I maximised everything I had as a player. And then when I look back, it was just, I just came in and worked hard every day. I didn't do it. I could have done a lot more with it.
And you started as an assistant there at Wingate, and you did that for 8 years. And so, what was that role like? Did that afford you the opportunity to get really get in and work one-to-one with the player, or was it a different type of role?
Yeah, it was good because I did it for 2 years, and then I took the women's job in for 6 years. So for those 2 years, yeah, it was a good challenge because I was coaching players who were the same age as me, a year or two younger, that I had previously gone out socialised with, and now had to probably the best thing my head coach Gary Hamill did for me. I still keep in touch with him. The best thing he did for me was he put standards in place, and not standards of coaching points. He put standards of professionalism. And he was, the first time before I took the job, he's like, this is what it entails in terms of the relationship with the players. No more going out. I would have been a pretty social animal. No more going out. No more hanging out. This is how the relationship is going to work. And I love that to be. Now I could, and probably did it the wrong way, and probably just, now I fell out with a lot of people in that because I went from, I probably didn't transition smoothly, and explain them my new position. So I kind of just became a coach overnight and wouldn't have been very outspoken, but it taught me a little bit about seeing it from a different perspective, but also then being a bit confident to speak out about stuff.
And when, again, really interesting point, again, if you don't mind me asking you this, you said you fell out with some people. In what way, what happened, and if you could get in the magic time machine and go back, what would you do differently? Yeah,
I fell out with a couple of players who would have probably been our top performers,
okay,
which I would have perceived by, we went through a transition period when I left my last year we were really good, and then we were really young because we lost a lot of senior players. So coming off a coaching course, my goal was, and with the head coach, was to establish more of a, we had young players in, so almost the system became the goal. And coming off a coaching course, you're ingrained in how to coach a system of play. Now the top players would have been a little bit older and a little bit better, and not really into, they would a little bit more flexibility needed,
okay,
but I wasn't willing to give them the flexibility. They had to toe the line into the system. And right now, as a coach now, I'd be like, no, you just would have pulled that player aside, or you just would have ignored certain behaviours on the training field and let them naturally take their course. But back then it was enforced one rule for high standards for all, and I could see why I had problems. That was inexperience for me, for sure.
I was going to say, do you think that is a marker of inexperience? Is almost wanting things to be perfect all the time and not allowing for individual differences?
Yeah, and especially I think over here, I think you're ingrained subconsciously in the culture over here to that. The coach says what goes, and
Right.
especially in college, and then once you become a coach, you kind of say, right, well, that goes automatically where I say go. And for the most part of young 17, 18-year-old US players, that was fine. But for the 22-year-old who were a year younger than me, they were like, no, like, we're going to do this. And So I would fall out with them and then leave it to the boss man to because it was good experience for me, because he didn't really let me away with it. He was, he kind of held me accountable to any relationships that were strained. And then it taught me to, how to work around them. One or two I worked around. One or two were never kind of fixed. And then and then I had to live with that.
Right. Okay. And so, sorry, did you say you got the head coach position at Wingate for the women's? Yeah. Okay. All right. So you transitioned onto that. So you went from assistant coach to head coach, and that was only after a couple of years. So that's a big shift, mate.
Yeah, 24, 25 years of age to become a head coach again. Yeah. You're dealing with players that are 21, 22. So, and it was the first time coaching females. So there was a number of changes to transition to. But I wanted to try to instill, I was getting a bit more confident in what I wanted from a culture and what I wanted from a training point of view. So, and it was a culture that never really, that it had never really, I suppose, transitioned into modern. It was still pretty much a club culture at that stage. So I thought there was a lot of potential in it, but it was, and players weren't really committed to the game. So that was my first, and that was always the thing where the older players were like, yeah, this is what we want coming in from a head coach. We want someone who's going to get players in who are committed, who's going to push us, who's going to challenge us. And then that was it. Yeah, it was a crazy 6 months, because that was a lot of mistakes and a lot of growth for sure.
And that commitment piece, was that solved through, if you reflect back, was that solved through bringing, was it a recruitment challenge, or was it very much on the pitch, communication, putting the right activities, or a mixture of both?
Yeah, what's interesting is, like, I think my biggest strength back then would have been my enthusiasm to the game. So when we started pre-season, my sessions would have been pretty lively, and and the players were all, yeah, this is great, we're enjoying this, and it's so different, as everyone does when a new manager comes in. And then we played our first pre-season game, and we were poor, as it usually happens, where all this work in the train, you go out and it's rubbish, and you're like, oh, it's going to be hard. So anyway, and we're still in pre-season camp, and I remember the next morning I got a phone call from the captain, and she said, listen, we've got a problem. We said there was going to be no drinking, no carrying on. There was 5 or 6 of the players went out last night, and they broke team rules. So I'm like, oh my, and this was a problem in their culture. Yep. So I decided to really go. I remember I just basically called the team meeting. I was gonna make a big deal of it. So I told the team, basically, whoever, stand up if you did it. And I was like, right, pick your stuff out of your locker, clean out your stuff and come see me tomorrow morning. And basically got rid of 1 or 2 of them, and who were injured during the time, and then 3 or 4 of them had like a 3 or 4. It was really, really harsh what the sentence was, almost, 3 or 4 game suspension. But what that done, like, kind of set a tone of what I was going to be about initially. And then adding players on top of that became almost an identity. Listen, this is, it gave me a massive problem for about 5 or 6 weeks. But then over a period of time, it became a little bit easier.
Given that you're 24, 25 years old at the time, and that sounds like a challenge that could be quite overwhelming. Did you have a mentor at the time? Did you use your previous boss as a mentor and run some ideas by him over that? Yeah. And
going back to the standards that he held to me as a professional coming in to coach, so I realised that's huge. So everything he was backing everything I did, because it had, and I believed it was in the best interests of the program. It was time to lift the standards, and it wasn't. There was those 9 months of the year to have a heavy social life or have a social life in the focus. But for 3 months, let's get working on soccer. Let's try and get better. Let's try and improve. Let's throw everything we have into the game. And I still believe that today. Like, I believe that was the correct decision. And again, but it's very, very, cultures now are a little bit different, where I think cultures have to be modified a little bit more, and that's, you don't necessarily, you have a problem initially, but your bigger problem comes probably 2 or 3 years down the line when it needs to be modified slightly.
What do you mean by that culture needs to be modified?
So when you get the initial, that grinding culture, yeah. I don't think that grinding culture is enough to get you through to, to win more games or to empower, because that's all driven by coaching rules. Yep. So, that's necessarily by having a fear of a suspension hanging over the player's head. Yep. It's really good in month 3 or 4, but to get real buy-in, you want the players to drive it, and then initially you have the players driving it because it's different, but then you want the players to instill the standards, and then, that's kind of what I discovered at Bakersfield was when we made a real conscious effort to make it more of a player-driven culture, and you open yourself up to more mistakes, more learning, more, giving players the opportunity to do X, Y, and Z. They might choose X and you want them to choose, so you now have to work through that, and that was probably another big challenge as a coach.
So that's a neat segue onto Bakersfield. So you left Wingate, went to the Bakersfield program, and you've just mentioned there a player-centred program. So you've given us a few details there, but just take me through. So you arrive, shiny new program you want to instill. You want it to be player-centred. So how did you go about doing that? Yeah,
initially, maybe it was I went in on my own. I had the assistant coach with me, who was with the program, and so he was with the staff before. And initially, like most coaches do, you come in, you have a lot of energy, and you think there's potential here.
Yep. And
then, like I said, you play a couple of games, and you realise it wasn't. It's going to be more difficult than I thought. So you realise, that the players maybe need a bit more push, and you need extra players, and you want to lift standards, and all of a sudden, what was energized 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, after 6-7 weeks, the players are like, he's not much different from the last coach, so that changes your behaviour. So it was probably in year 1 was a bit of a sledgehammer approach, where it was, let's rip the squad up, let's get players in, and let's start it fresh. And then year 2 and 3 was building with the young players, and it was very coach-led, where it was very much young players, and you're trying to just guide them into, they have a lot of energy. You're just trying to mould it into a decent product on and off the field. And then, like for me, that's where I brought in an assistant coach who kind of walked on the campus in my first year, and he just saw it differently. Like we talked about culture, and he was really player led. And what he kind of opened my eyes is like, if you're trying to bring in the same player all the time, you're never going to get a difference maker, because that player is always going to be, according to your personality. Yep. So you've got to change how, you've got to work with players that you don't necessarily get along with if you're going to take this program to the next level. And I'm like, wow, that's going to be hard. so so we tried, we brought in Donna Fisher. We did. I'm really proud of a lot of the work we did, because we tried to move it to where players got a little bit more ownership of the program. But in that we progressed a lot on the field, and then we hit a couple of bumps off the field, and those were the ones that I could have been a bit more patient working through, and I was a bit frustrated with it.
What do you mean by patient? And obviously, give us details where you can give us details, but it's obviously some incidents off the pitch. What do you mean by patient? How could you have been more patient?
Yeah, so you have general standards, and then like Wingate, we're going to throw everything into this here, and 1 or 2 players made a social decision taken. So, I listened to your podcast a couple of weeks ago with Rowan. The martial arts coach.
Frank Shamrock.
Yeah. And you were talking about basically how the decisions are made from the person making a social decision as an adolescent.
Yep.
Making a social decision is
Yes.
like naturally they're not going to make that decision. They're going to take that decision over a rational decision. That's their soccer. And I came after listening to that. I was in the gym and we were on the away trip. I went back to the hotel room and I'm like, Craig, I just listened to this podcast. I wish I had listened to that 7-8 years ago. So basically to go back, how I viewed players making a social decision over a soccer decision was that you've now basically put your social priorities ahead of soccer for your whole. That's your psyche, and you've put that ahead of the team, and and I was really, really frustrated with it. And in that frustration, there was consequences. Those consequences were I wanted it to be something that they remembered. So obviously it was running, and it was really a bad couple of weeks. And I lost the players during that time. I really lost the players because I didn't really, my communication, my frustration showed. I was more standoffish. So my interactions lowered with players, and I never got them back. And if I had have just stood back and taken a bit more time to be like, listen, this is how it's going to be, and this is the learnings we're going to take from it, I probably could have rectified some of it. And then, so listening to your podcast, being a bit more aware, and that's probably my thing as a coach, is that my biggest mistakes have been where I've flown into, I haven't just flown in off emotional rage or emotional, just irrational decisions. I've thought of it. I just haven't thought of it long enough to where I've, wired enough around everything of all the ramifications. So I'm just impatient.
It's interesting, Gary, because as you're talking, I'm thinking here, and I'm thinking of that some of the tweets I'm doing at the moment, and some of the debates and good debates that I'm having with coaches at the moment around that attitude piece and this notion that we have to insist on players having this incredible attitude, or the players have to bring the attitude to the table. And I just think that human beings are so much more complex than that, and that from a psychosocial standpoint, you've got this group of 20 players, 25 players, however many it is, and players are you can set the guidelines and you can have the players set the guidelines, but players are going to do things irrationally at times. They're going to make mistakes, if that's the right term for it. They're going to go off-piste. And what I hear you say is sometimes as a head coach, you've got to stand back and actually go, okay, I didn't want that to happen, and that's not good. But if I fly off the handle here, if I make irrational decisions around, the punishing these players, then actually that can be to the detriment of my program. That I have to see these people as human beings. Now, there are lines and there are limits, absolutely, and players need to understand that. But we also have to understand that we have to create an environment, and we have to create a communication process and protocol that enables players to demonstrate the right attitude, and when they go off course, find ways to help them come back on course, if that makes sense.
And that's it. Yeah, that's it. And that takes, a level of patience, or that takes a level of increase in your awareness, or just holding yourself to a bit more perspective. And sometimes, and this is where I'm really interested in coaching, is when, sitting here with you right now and obviously in a coffee shop and you're talking about it and listening to a podcast in the gym, it's so obvious. It's like, oh, I'm an idiot. But I'm thinking, why did I make that mistake? How did I not see this? But coaching is hard because there's so much, the pressure. Like when I was in Bakersfield, I thought I was coaching. When you're in that 3-month season as a US coach, you think you're coaching Man United. You think you're in this. You think the papers are talking about you all day, and you think that everyone's just looking at you, and you're under so much pressure. But the reality is that you're actually not. You have a license to take a breath and maybe take 24 hours to talk about it with someone else, and maybe don't make the decision. But sometimes that 3-month window in college soccer over here just leads you to think that the decision had to be made yesterday, and if you don't make it, your whole program will just go down the tube.
Yeah, I think I think the reason it feels like it's Manchester United because it's just so meaningful to you, mate, isn't it? I mean, there's two things to say that. I just think it's your world, it's your passion, it's your profession, it's how you put food on the table. So of course, as human beings, we're emotionally driven, and we're going to be really emotionally driven at a time when we feel we've been betrayed, essentially, by people who you feel are supposed to be on your side. So it is understandable. It is understandable, and I think the second thing is we're so socialised into outcome and performance, winning and performance, and perhaps seeing that as almost a robotic process. Everybody turns up with these incredible attitudes every day, and there's no room for any other attitude than 100% effort and 100% energy, and leaving all life problems to the side. And it's all about tactics and technique and physicality. Whereas, and this is where I always say, well, stop, hold on. Playing is psychosocial. Coaching is psychosocial. Everybody is invested in psychosocial, and what that means is sometimes it's actually taking a step back and saying we're human beings, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to have errors in judgment. It doesn't mean we turn up and be lazy every day. It doesn't mean we turn up and play distracted every day. It doesn't mean we turn up and be destructive to our team and our teammates. But it does actually just say if somebody turns up and they're at 80% of attitude, then it's worth a conversation. It's what's happened. Is it their studies? Is it something with their family? Is it that actually they're a bit of a neurotic introvert and they're wondering what everybody thinks of them, and that's just part of being a human being, and so they're not quite on it. So what can we do as a coach? And I think that's where it's so important to put psychosocial first. Everything about the environment says coaching, soccer, technique, tactics, physicality. But actually, if we go, stop, okay, when I deal with human beings, we deal with psychosocial first. And then suddenly there's nuance and there's subtleties and there's different processes being put in place.
Yeah, and just thinking there when you're talking, like I've gone through, someone put a tweet up a couple of weeks ago, and it was a quote from one of an old one, and I just cringed when I saw it. I think it was something along the lines of, if a player doesn't show up and compete or have a great attitude, they're saying exactly what they think of you and your culture. And I thought, I hope that doesn't go, I hope that doesn't get many retweets and many people see that, because I don't believe that anymore, because they're not actually, like just what you're saying there, that's not a personal slight on you as a coach. They're not choosing a bad attitude or they're choosing a bad day because they can't stand you or they think your program is awful. It's just, these are the issues that people have. And yeah, I see that more today. And that's kind of along the lines of why I chose to try to move away from, because I was becoming more it was leading to more problems, even to me personally. I wasn't enjoying coaching for the last probably 12 months as a head coach, because that was how I was viewing the game, and I wanted to take a step back and try to get a bit closer to the players, because in my mind, where I was moving as a coach should have moved me closer to the players and closer to success. And it actually made me a better coach technically and with X's and O's, but I saw myself moving, or felt myself moving away from players, and I also felt myself actually enjoying coaching less. So that was a little bit of reflection for me.
Did you just say that actually you feel that getting to know players, taking the time to spend time with them, can help you become a better coach of the X's and the O's?
Yeah, what is it? The whatever quote? I'm not drinking enough coffee this morning. You chase two rabbits and they both get away. And right, yep. I find like when I was a young coach, I was very much into the enthusiasm, making an impact to the people every day. There was a bit of energy. It was enjoyable, and it worked at that level. So when I tried to become a better coach, I then tried to do that and become. I placed a lot into X's, and I tried to improve myself tactically. So I went to different paths, and as I improved myself tactically, I got worse. I became a lot colder, more what's the word? A bit more calculated with coaching.
Yeah.
And then became not as my personality then became less impactful. So I then probably became standoffish and not as much. And then where I thought they were great training sessions, actually the last 6 months as a coach, I still look at them now and I'm like, that's a good training set, but that's not enjoyable for that player. It's just like mechanical, robotic training. So you almost have to assess that as well.
That's such an interesting thing to say, mate. And I think it's, if I reflect back on my own background as a golf coach, you're so socialised into golf swing. So every solution is golf swing. And now as a sports psychologist working with golfers and interacting with their golf coaches, those golf coaches just want to go straight to the golf swing. Whereas often the solution, and I'm not, the golf swing is important, of course it is, but often the solution lies in actually simplifying that and actually helping them manage themselves better on the course from a psychological perspective. And it sounds like what you're saying to me is the same, and that as a coach, to optimize your coaching, you need to. Nobody's saying ignore tactics, but it's actually learning tactics, but then being able to coach those tactics while still coaching people.
Yeah, and if you can't get the people, if you can't get them engaged, it doesn't matter. Like there's some stuff today, and this is what I love about my current position is that your players in college. I had to learn that. With the whole thing fell apart basically at one stage, and I had to take a step back and be like, I'm not enjoying it. What have I created? How did I let it go? Blah blah blah. So it takes a step back. But here I get it every day. Like I can go to a player, I can speak to a player, and they won't. Sometimes they'll tell me that listen, Gary, you're miles away. So what are you talking about? Or they can show it. I can just see it in their face. I can show them something on a laptop, or I can show them something on a board, and be like, this is what I'm thinking. And they'll be like, no, not for me, guy. And I think it's great. So now it makes me a better. Whereas you don't get that sometimes at the younger level because you don't create that trust with the player. But if you don't have it, you have no chance. And I think sometimes as coaches, we place an emphasis too much on that. Players enjoy tactics in the game, the strategic side of the game, just as much as we do, which they don't. And then we also think that the player will. If it's presented in a way that's just any way at all, that they're going to take it, which they won't. So we're probably wrong. And we get carried away with this game-like training. Someone posted something yesterday, I saw it online. It was this relay race, and then someone's right, well, what's that got to do with the game? And someone's written, because it just looks like fun. Players might enjoy it. And I'm like, yeah, I would do that with our team because you have to keep them engaged. And that's part of the way, I think you can become a better coach, but you can also at the same time become a worse coach.
Interesting. I tell you what, let's park that engagement piece for a second because you brought us neatly up to date. Your current role at Chicago Red Stars. Obviously, there'll be some proprietary information that you can't talk about, but tell us what do you do there? What do you do as Chicago Red Stars?
Yeah, I'm an assistant coach. My key areas are probably around trying to facilitate information, tactical information to the players on a daily basis. So it's getting it's getting processes in place with games in the preparation and review side, on the daily end of meetings, and there's a fair bit of analysis, fair bit of computer work in there, and then on the session design and trying to help with that there, and then a lot of it's individual work where not with every player. So it's looking at targeting quite a few players and trying to get a bit more from them and trying to engage them a little bit more in the process. If they're the younger players, trying to engage them more in the process of coming into a full-time environment. And if it's the older players, then sometimes it's just about adding one or two things to their game. So it's part development, part coaching, part analysis. I love it. I absolutely love it.
I was going to say it's a lovely little balance. It sounds like a lovely little balance between the tech piece there. You said quite a bit of video analysis, and the psychosocial relationship side. It sounds like they're fused together in your role.
Yeah, it's just coming from a head coach where I was a head coach for most of my development as a coach has been as a head coach. So now what I didn't like when I said about my experience as a head coach, I loved every job I had. And I view them as positive experiences. But what I didn't like about being a head coach is you have to, almost especially in a college environment, you have to wear this hat of, this is serious, everyone, and you have to, and some days you just want to relax and be yourself and bring a bit more out of players. And I can do that. My role at the minute is I think I'm viewed as pretty much a positive voice in the environment. So, I can sit down with a player and we can have a chat. And I feel now is like where I would say is I feel like I spent 15 years studying a game, and now I'm 2 years into studying footballers, and I'm finding that a lot more interesting than studying the game.
Studying footballers. So do you mean that, again, I come back to this, studying a footballer, I'm perceiving that as the tech-tac side of a footballer, but also that psychosocial side, and helping that those two come together, essentially.
Yeah. Like I read a lot of your work, and Craig Harrington does as well in our environment, and like again, I feel like I've gone away from that there, and the psychosocial is, Craig's a different perspective for me, and he's the other assistant coach.
Okay.
So we do a lot of the prep work together, and we were polar opposites 12 months ago, and Craig worked at the Galaxy. He worked with players like Beckham and Keane,
okay.
and he saw them interact every day, and I would have been a bit more, here, this is the way I play. And no, it has to be enjoyable. Like, the player has to come in every day, and now I'm getting a better appreciation of what the players, not only state of mind is, not mind, so state of mind kind of over mindset, whereas I would have been this mindset guru 24 months ago, okay. And now it's just a bit more like where are they at, and almost looking at how the environment has impacted them, where some of them are young, some of them have different types of pressure. Some of the pressure is financial pressure, which I've never dealt with before, and it's learning where and there's times as well I do feedback with them, and it's making me think about when to give the feedback. Even yesterday, I was in yesterday, we're coming off a result, a loss, and you're like, I had a meeting scheduled with one of the players, and you could just see now if this had been done by the phone, I would have proceeded with the meeting. But she came into the room that I was in, and she was like, basically, hey, are we still meeting today? And as soon as I saw her face, I was like, hey, we could do it tomorrow if that works. And you swear you just gave her $100. She's like, oh, that would be great. She just needed a bit of space, and I think as coaches, that's reading people, but also reading kind of parking your ego. And it's not about you as a coach. Those players are the priority all the time, and I didn't always think that way.
Interesting. Yeah, it's so social, isn't it? And just, as you say, reading that person and actually getting a feel for the situation, just parking it. Okay, look, we can do this tomorrow. We can just do this tomorrow. It's not a problem. And yet, it almost feels like having that flexibility as a coach, rather than being too rigid. Well, we've got this process and we have to stick to this process. Whoa, stop. Just a bit more flexibility there.
Yeah. I think we're a little bit spreadsheet driven these days, and those processes. I'm a process person. I love having these systems in place, and I would be one, especially on the staff. I'm the one to probably argue for more processes, but at the same time, sometimes you limit yourself, or sometimes you cause more problems with those processes because the dynamics change. And I think what I'm learning at this level is that sometimes the players, even I would have been going back to this training, this whole game realistic training mindset, where we were kind of had an open conversation with one of our leadership groups last year, and one of the players were asked, what type of training do you want to do on the day after the first day back after the recovery? And she was like, get little touches on the ball and have a little 5v5, and I was like, I was horrified. I'm like, well, what, where's the tactical work in this? What are we doing? And as I was quickly told, I'm like, this is what we need to get our minds right and our bodies right to do the tactical work at 100% the next day. And I was like, okay, I'm curious to see how that's going to look. And 3 months later, it's the best training day of the week.
Really?
Buzzing. Oh, it's buzzing. And it has, for me, what my role in it is probably more just getting balls and codes lined up and letting them go. And so it's so too much. I think coach education, rightly so, leads us in a path where we are the kid, it's coach centered because you have such a role. But reality is that it's got to be player centered.
Do you think it comes back to that co-creation, Gary. It sounds to me like the process put in place there, the important process put in place, if process is the right word here, is actually asking the players themselves. In my experience in soccer, globally, it's that instructions, ideas, creative ideas tend to be top down. They tend to be from the coaching staff. Right, we're going to do this. This is a great idea. Whereas actually, if you ask the players, they have a lot of really good ideas. They know the mood. They know a lot of them know what they should be doing. And so it's asking the players and trusting them to put something in place. And as long as a coach or the coaching staff can observe and monitor and ask questions during the execution of those activities or sessions or whatever, then just empowering players to come up with solutions is useful.
100%. But then I would say, why aren't we doing that? And I would say, why have I not done that? And for me, I see a lot of coaches do not want to concede that control. That control is because for a number of reasons, maybe personality reasons, maybe that's the motivator for being a coach, is to have this position where you can impact from a top-down format, but also from, when we look at the TV and we see Pep and we see, it's almost that the managers are now becoming bigger than the players, which I don't think we are aware enough to say, like, that's fine for a Sky Sports commercial. It's not fine for you to be a 14, 16 college coach. That's not what it's about. But I also think then for me, why I've struggled with this, I struggle with not necessarily the control, it's the impatient part of it, where, I know you had Doug Lamoff on and I had him on mine as well, and he's talking about asking the questions and training and being a bit more patient with that. And I just, that's so hard for me, because if players, even with my boy at home, if you're asking him a question, he doesn't really answer in 10 seconds, you want to just shout it out so you can move on to the next one. And it kills it.
It reminds me that actually the first interview we did on the Sports Site show with Dr. Ed Corlin, and he said he would stand on the sidelines and he would literally be, how I would describe, using his self-talk to tell himself, shut up, don't speak. He would literally be commanding himself because he knows instinctively he wants to say something. Yeah, and I look back now, and now, obviously age really, really helps, and when you have experiences as a coach, which I'm more for coaches trying to survive setbacks, because every setback I've had, I've got better. But if we're not, again, I think there's a lot of pressure. I think it's difficult to coach in 2019. I think it's going to be really, really hard to coach in 2025 because there's so much pressure. And if you are in the firing line, if it is about you, then you're guaranteed to, at any sport, Dan, you're guaranteed to lose games. So if you make it about you, then you're putting this pressure on you to where when it does hit a setback for a team, they're coming after you because you've structured that way. And that's something I've dealt with that as a coach. I've had periods as a college coach where I've lost 2-3 games in a row, and I'm like, I feel as if I'm really under pressure here. But that's because I've set up a structure where I've made it about me. And I think today, if you want to have longevity, not only with your team and make it, a long-term vision with your team, but also for your livelihood or your mental well-being as a coach, you have to make it co-owned for sure. That engagement piece, mate. I mean, I suppose that's part of having that longevity, is engaging players and helping them have fun, enjoy it. It's a tough balance to create, but it sounds like you and Craig work hard together to try and help the manager there, to the head coach, to create an environment that is engaging.
Yeah, and we're fortunate where sometimes you have the players at the professional level don't look at the coach. Well, I don't see them looking at the coach for signs to say, like, all right, is today a thumbs up to have energy? Is today, are we annoyed today? They just come in and they get along with it and bring good energy. So it's easier. But I think when you're in the, for me, I can now take a step back with settings like meetings and settings like reviews and try to make it a bit more player friendly, even with like with graphics and tactical analysis, I think tactical analysis is mostly boring process for players. So if you make, how do they well, you have to get to their phones. They're not going to sit in a classroom and think this is great. You have to get it to their phones. And also you have to, that's why I use a lot of coach paint. I use a lot of graphics on that there, because it's worth spending 2 or 3 hours to do, because the players look at it and think, oh wow, that looks pretty cool, because it looks like a video game or something I've played and now I'm in it. So, they're not conditioned to watch themselves. They're conditioned to watch, Messi or Ronaldo, and you try to want to change that.
Do you think that there's, you've done a bit of coaching in men's soccer. Do you think there's a difference between coaching women and men's soccer, and do you think that detail comes into that at all?
Not really. Like I haven't really been in the men's game, but our offices were right next to the college set, and I've always been right next door to the men's coaches. And in terms of the people, I always hear people say, well, for a female player, the level of communication increases as a coach, and I would disagree with that. When I've seen more guys walk past the doors and try to get a little bit more, if it's affirmation or if it's just a bit of interaction with a coach. I think it's pretty consistent. We train after the Chicago Fire, and lucky enough to observe that every day. And I think it's the actions of the coach. You talk about the psychosocial skills of the coach, and I see that having such an impact on both areas, because I know them, but I don't know them, the Chicago Fire guys, but they are very, very relationship driven. When I watch the end of their training, when I watch them walk off the field, you have 4 coaches. Every coach always walks off with a player and is discussing, and it's just it's the kind of environment that it's a nice little segue into our training, because I'm thinking, that's what I should be doing. So I see it pretty consistently. I might be wrong because I'm not really in both, but that's how I see it from the outset.
And Gary, I've been a guest on your podcast a few times now. One where I seem to remember being seriously ill in Chicago and hardly being able to speak above the cacophony of a bar, where we had a few good guests on. Who did we have? We had Tony Strudwick, and we had Anna Friedrich and Todd Bean. So it was fantastic. So obviously the episodes with me aside, which I know you would pick as your favourite, clearly. What's been a highlight, because your podcast is absolutely brilliant, mate. I'm always listening to it on my journeys around England and Britain and what have you, and you've had some brilliant guests. What's kind of been the highlight? What have you learned? I mean, I know that's kind of a big question, but what have you learned that you put into practice?
Yeah, I've tried to, similar to yourself, try to get a variety of different backgrounds. So sometimes it's enjoyable because it's an area of, like, for example, sports science is an area that I don't even pretend to go anywhere near or know anything about. So having someone like Tony or someone like David Tenney come on and talk, it's learning. But the people that I catch myself kind of going over the interview 2 or 3 times are the people that are individual developers, who are even maybe not official individual developers, but are assistant coaches that have focused on the individual. So Mike O'Beal or Louis Lancaster, and I just see them a little bit differently. And that's where, I gravitate towards those people, because I want to listen and get fresh perspective. Like I think Louis talked about we complain about players on social media. He had a Brazilian player who's practicing after the shots after the game, and Louis videoing it, and he gets it on social media, or he gets it, the guy wants the video for social media, and Louis like, all right, now you've got the goalkeeper wanting for his Instagram, and he's just, I would never have thought of that as a coach. And now, the little things that you want to put in. I actually have one coming next week where the guy is, it's a tactical analyst, Yao Nuno Fonseca from does a lot of stuff on Coach Paint and tactical analysis. He was talking about how to communicate scouting reports through Instagram. And I thought, wow. And it's just, gets you, so little ideas like that there, and you go away and you think, I would always think as a coach, my biggest fear as a coach is that I go stale and that I just produce the same rubbish, but think that it's really, really innovative. So I just want to sort of challenge myself by getting exposed to people with new ideas.
Yeah, fantastic. That sounds really interesting. And how many books have you written now, mate?
6.
Have you done 6?
Yeah.
You're 2 ahead of me. I can't believe it. Right. I need to get writing. I started about 3 up on you, and then you did your first.
The wife put a bit of pressure on me to knock a few more out there. So
fair enough.
What have you got a new one coming out? Are you going to write a new one?
I will. I've got an idea, so I will be writing a new one. I will be writing it eventually.
I think it's about time.
Yes. What's the last one that you wrote?
The last one was a 4-3-3 book, and it's probably, I haven't done a great job in communicating. It probably sounds like, hey, this is how you play 4-3-3, but it's almost, the goal of the book was to get more of an insight from different coaches to say this is how you can have certain principles, but you can still do different ideas in your shape and your training, and that's how I want to see coaching. Is I think we're a bit rigid in our ideas. The one I want to work on next is almost how to look at players as pawns on a board, but how do you manage personalities of players on the training day to day?
Yeah,
that's the one I would like to write.
Yeah, interesting. Cheekily stepping into my territory there, mate.
Yeah,
I'll have to put an injunction on that or something. Serve you notice. This is copyright. Gary Curneen is not allowed to write about psychology.
Brilliant. No, definitely won't be going anywhere near stuff that I don't know anything about, so you're okay there.
No, not at all. You fire away, mate. You fire away. No, look, awesome to talk to you. How can people get in contact? I know, like me, you've got about 45 different Twitter accounts, so you can't move for Gary Curneen tweets and probably Dan Abraham's tweets as well. But so, what's your social media platforms?
Yeah, at Gary Curneen on Twitter and at Gary Curneen on Instagram is where I do most of my work, and email is gary@modernsoccercoach.com. So always try to, a bit harder some days, but try to get up with coaches and try to keep those lines of communication open and try to establish new ones.
Perfect. Brilliant. Great. Well, mate, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you, Dan.
I know everyone's going to really enjoy that. Now, I really did enjoy that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me exactly what you think of the Sports Psych Show, and if you've got any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm really looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.